The alarm on Dock 7 had been screaming for 4 minutes when Marcus Cole finally cut the power to silence it. Not because the emergency was over, because the noise was making it harder to think. The ship had come in fast, too fast, scraping the magnetic docking clamps with a shriek of metal that brought 3 port workers running. By the time Marcus reached Bay 19, the others had already backed away. The vessel was unlike anything registered in the Kepler station manifest. Sleek, dark, and, shaped like a crescent blade, it sat at an angle that should have been impossible given the clamp configuration. Steam or something like it bled from a rupture along its lower hull. The material wasn't alloy. It was something that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Marcus set his toolkit down and crouched beside the breach. "You're not supposed to touch foreign vessels without clearance," said Yolanda, the dock supervisor, from 10 feet behind him. "Ship's leaking drive fluid," Marcus said without turning. "Clearance takes 6 hours. Whatever's in there won't last 6 hours." Silence. Then, the sound of Yolanda walking away, which was as close to permission as he was going to get. He pulled out his scanner and ran it across the hull. The readout flickered, rejected the scan, flickered again, then gave him a partial thermal map. Something inside was still running, a secondary system, maybe life support. Whatever it was drawing power from a failing coupling near the breach. If the coupling failed completely, the secondary system went with it. Marcus had repaired hundreds of ships. Freighters, patrol crafts, survey vessels, even 2 decommissioned warships that the station had picked up from salvage auctions. He had a feel for machines the way some people had a feel for language. He didn't need to understand every component. He needed to understand what it was trying to do. This ship was trying to stay alive. He found the coupling beneath a panel that opened with a mechanism he'd never seen, a sequence of pressure points that responded to touch rather than tools. He figured it out in 40 seconds by watching how the panel flexed when he pressed different sections. Inside, the coupling was cracked along 2 axes. Catastrophic in any system he knew. Probably catastrophic here too. He pulled 2 field repair clamps from his kit, the heavy-duty ones he reserved for plasma conduit work, and began bridging the crack. The material resisted his tools at first, harder than titanium, with a surface that seemed to shift slightly under contact, as if it were aware of pressure. He slowed down. Treated it the way he treated antique systems, with patience, not force. Behind him, he heard the other dock workers whispering. He ignored them. 40 minutes into the repair, the steam stopped venting. The thermal map on his scanner stabilized. The secondary system was holding. He sealed the panel and stood, knees aching, hands stained with something dark blue and faintly luminescent. That was when the ship's side door opened. He didn't hear it slide. He felt the change in air pressure against the back of his neck and turned. Standing at the top of the ramp was a child. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old by human reckoning, though he understood immediately she wasn't human. Her skin was the pale gray of winter clouds. Her eyes were solid gold, no pupil, no iris boundary, just deep unbroken amber that caught the dock lights and held them. She wore a garment that looked woven from something between silk and metal, a dark material that moved with her like water. Her expression was completely still. Behind her, barely visible in the ship's dim interior, stood 2 figures. They were tall, very tall, wearing armor that matched the hull, light-absorbing, seamless. Their faces were hidden behind smooth masks, but their posture was unmistakable. These were guards. Not security personnel. Not escorts. These were the kind of people who stood between a person and death. Marcus realized he was still holding his repair clamp. He set it down slowly. The child descended the ramp 1 step, then stopped. She looked at the closed panel he had repaired, then at the blue stain on his hands, then at his face. She said nothing. The guards had not moved. Their stillness was more unnerving than any weapon would have been. Marcus had grown up in a repair bay. He'd been covered in oil at age 6, handing his father wrenches under the belly of a cargo hauler. He knew the feeling of being assessed by someone who understood machines, who could see, without being told, what had been done and whether it had been done well. The child was doing that now. Then she tilted her head, a small, precise movement, and said something in a language Marcus had never heard. It was low, musical, and brief. One of the guards behind her responded in the same language, in a tone that was carefully neutral. The child looked back at Marcus. Then she stepped back up the ramp and disappeared into the ship. The door closed without a sound. Marcus stood alone in Bay 19, the alarm long since silenced, the dock quiet except for the distant hum of the station's ventilation. His scanner showed the ship's secondary systems running steady. Whatever he had fixed it correctly. He picked up his toolkit. He had 3 more jobs before the end of shift. The message arrived the next morning before Marcus had finished his first coffee. It came through the station's standard communication system, which was strange, because the ship in Bay 19 hadn't connected to the station network. He had checked. It was one of the things dock protocol required him to log. No network handshake. No registration ping. The ship had been, as far as the system was concerned, invisible. But the message was there. Sitting in his work queue between a parts delivery confirmation and a maintenance request for a leaking coolant line in Bay 4. It had no sender name. No vessel ID. Just a string of characters that the translation layer rendered as a job reference number, and a single line of text beneath it. Your repair work has been noted. You will be contacted. Marcus read it twice. Finished his coffee. Went to fix the coolant line. He didn't tell anyone about the message. Not because he was hiding it. He simply didn't know what to say about it. He wasn't the kind of man who built theories out of thin air. He fixed what was broken and waited for problems to declare themselves clearly before he responded to them. By midday, Bay 19 was empty. The Crescent Blade ship was gone. The dock log showed no departure record. No magnetic clamp release. No fuel consumption spike. It was as if the ship had simply decided the station no longer applied to it and had stopped being present there. Yolanda flagged the missing entry as a system error and moved on. She had 7 other vessels to manage and a part supplier who kept sending the wrong threading specifications. Marcus cleaned the blue stain from his hands with industrial solvent. It took longer than it should have. The substance had a quality of persistence, resisting removal in a way that felt almost intentional. When it finally came off, he noticed the skin beneath was unmarked. No irritation, no chemical burn. Whatever the fluid had been, it hadn't been harmful. He filed it away. 3 days passed. He repaired a fractured thruster coupling on a mining barge, rebuilt a navigation relay on a survey ship whose captain insisted on watching and offering suggestions throughout, and diagnosed a fuel injector fault on a cargo hauler that turned out to be 2 separate problems, neither of which the owner had suspected. Normal work. Good work. On the 4th day, a man arrived at the dock asking for him by name. He wasn't human either, though he was close enough in appearance that a casual observer might not have noticed immediately. His proportions were slightly off, arms a fraction too long, neck a fraction too slender, the joints of his fingers bending in ways that suggested a different skeletal architecture beneath the skin. He wore civilian clothes, well-made, in colors that didn't quite match the station's lighting, which gave him an odd quality of not fully belonging to the space around him. He introduced himself in clean, accent-free station common as advisor Solon. He did not say who he was advising. "I'm here to ask you some questions about the repair work you performed 4 days ago," he said. His tone was professional, not threatening. Curious, Marcus thought. Like an engineer reviewing someone else's methodology. "Ask," Marcus said. They sat in the small break room off Bay 12. Marcus made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, then remembered he didn't know if Solon could drink it. Solon looked at the cup, then picked it up and held it without drinking, which seemed like a polite compromise. "The coupling you repaired," Solon said. "Did you understand what it was connected to? Life support secondary system. Or something functionally similar?" "Yes." Solon looked at him carefully. "Functionally similar. The system you kept running, it was maintaining a medical stasis field." Marcus set his own cup down. "Medical stasis," he repeated. "The occupant of that field had been in transit for 11 days with a progressive failure in the primary coupling. By the time the vessel reached your dock, the secondary coupling was maintaining the field at approximately 30% efficiency." Solon paused. "At 20%, the field collapses. We calculate you had perhaps 40 minutes remaining when you began the repair." Marcus thought about the 40 minutes he had spent with his hands inside the hull. Thought about how he had slowed down, treated the unfamiliar material with patience, not forced anything. "The child," he said. "She came out of the ship after I finished. She was monitoring the repair from inside." Solon's expression shifted slightly, not quite a smile, but something that acknowledged an irony he was choosing not to fully articulate. "She wanted to see who had done the work." "And the person in stasis?" Solon looked at him for a long moment. "That is why I am here," he said. "The person in the stasis field is someone whose survival has significant consequences for a great many people. The repair you performed, without knowing any of this, preserved those consequences." "I fixed a broken coupling," Marcus said. "You did," Solon agreed. "That is precisely what you did." He placed a small card on the table between them. It was made of the same light-absorbing material as the hull. On its surface was a single mark, not text, not a symbol Marcus could identify, but something that felt deliberate. "Significant?" "You will be asked to come somewhere," Solon said. "When you are ready." "Come where?" "That depends on whether you say yes." Marcus looked at the card. Thought about the blue stain that had been difficult to remove. The child's gold eyes measuring him from the top of the ramp. The guards who had stood in absolute stillness because stillness was how they communicated that everything within their reach was controlled. "What was I actually repairing?" he said. Solon stood. His answer was quiet and delivered without drama, which somehow made it heavier. "The life support for the Queen of the Velsheri sovereignty," he said. "The child is her daughter. The princess came out to look at you because she had watched you work through internal sensors and wanted to understand what kind of person saves something they don't know they're saving." He moved to the door. "The card will know when you've decided," he said. "It will reach us." Then he left. And Marcus sat alone in the break room with a cup of cooling coffee and a card made of impossible material and the particular weight of information that cannot be unfixed once it has been understood. He said yes 3 days later, not because he was brave or ambitious or drawn to significance, because the card had sat on his workbench while he repaired 6 other ships, and every time he looked at it, he thought about the 40 minutes he hadn't known were 40 minutes that mattered. About the coupling he had treated with patience not because he knew what it connected to, but because that was simply how he worked. He had saved something important without trying to. That felt like an obligation, not an achievement. The transport that arrived for him was small and unmarked and piloted by someone who introduced themselves only as a navigator and said nothing further for the entire 12-hour journey. Marcus spent most of it reading the technical specifications Solon had transmitted to his personal device. Partial, carefully curated, but enough to begin understanding the architecture of Velsheri engineering. It was not as alien as he had expected. The principles were the same. Power needed pathways, pressure needed management, failure needed to be interrupted before it cascaded. The materials and the configurations were different, but the logic underneath was familiar. Systems behaved according to their nature. A mechanic's job was to understand that nature and work with it. When the transport arrived, Marcus looked out the forward viewport and stopped reading. The structure ahead was not a station in any sense he had used the word before. It was vast, a layered complex that curved into itself in a way that suggested the architects had been working with gravity as a design element rather than a constraint. Hundreds of vessels were docked along its outer rings, ranging from small couriers to ships so large they made the structure itself seem modest. The light around it had a quality he couldn't immediately explain, then realized. The structure was emitting light, not just reflecting it, from thousands of points along its surface in patterns that shifted slowly, like breathing. "What is this place?" he asked. The navigator glanced back at him. "The seat," they said. Then returned to piloting. The seat. Marcus filed that information without reacting to it and went back to reading the technical specifications. Solon met him at the docking port with two members of what Marcus now recognized as the Royal Guard. Same armor, same absolute economy of movement, same quality of contained readiness. They acknowledged him with small nods that were formal rather than friendly and positioned themselves with the unconscious precision of people who had trained the habit of awareness into something automatic. "How is she?" Marcus said. Solon understood immediately who he meant. "Recovering. The stasis field was lowered 6 days ago. There are complications, but she is stable." "The child, the princess. Is she here?" "She is. She is asked to be present when you arrive." They walked through corridors that were simultaneously grander and more functional than Marcus had expected. The architecture was beautiful, but not in a decorative way, in the way that something perfectly engineered becomes beautiful as a consequence of being exactly right. The proportions, the materials, the flow of space, all of it suggested a culture that did not separate aesthetics from utility. The room they brought him to was not a throne room. It was not a formal hall or a reception chamber. It was a workshop. He understood that immediately, the way he understood engines. The smell of the space, the particular quality of the air, the type of lighting installed along the ceiling, broad spectrum, shadowless, the kind designed for close detail work. The benches were long and clear-surfaced, and on them were components he didn't recognize arranged with a precision that suggested ongoing work, not display. Standing near the central bench was the princess. She was dressed differently than she had been on the dock, still formal, but without the water-silk outer garment, in something more practical. She was looking at something on the bench when they entered, and she finished her examination before looking up, which Marcus respected. When she did look up, her gold eyes found him and held. "You fixed it correctly," she said. Her station common was careful and slightly accented, the words chosen with a deliberateness that suggested translation was still something she was working through. "My mother's field held for 9 more days." "I'm glad," Marcus said. She looked at his hands, then at his kit, which he'd brought out of habit, then back at his face. "I watched the entire repair," she said. "You slowed down when the material pushed back. You didn't force it. Forcing things usually breaks them worse." Something shifted in her expression. "The engineers here force things," she said. "They know the correct approach theoretically, but under pressure, they revert to force. She said it without criticism, as a fact she had observed and not yet resolved. That's common, Marcus said. Knowing and doing are different under stress. She considered this. Then she stepped aside from the bench and gestured at the components arranged on it. This is the primary coupling system from my mother's ship, she said. The one that failed. I want to understand why it failed so I can prevent it from failing again. The engineers gave me a report. I don't trust the report. Marcus looked at the components, then at her. Why don't you trust it? Because it says the failure was material fatigue, she said. But this coupling was replaced 14 months ago. The material doesn't fatigue in 14 months. She was right. He could see that immediately from the visual profile of the crack pattern. It wasn't fatigue fracture, which had a characteristic texture. This was stress fracture. Something had applied force the coupling wasn't designed to handle. Do you have the flight logs from the 11 days before arrival? He said. She produced them on a flat display without hesitation, which told him she had already been thinking along the same line. They worked together for 3 hours. Marcus read the components and the logs the way he read every system, by asking what it had been trying to do and what had stopped it. The princess followed his reasoning with a speed that surprised him. She asked precise questions, not general ones, and when he explained something, she didn't need it explained twice. By the end of the 3rd hour, they had identified the cause. A navigation correction applied during a pursuit-evasion maneuver had put lateral stress on the coupling that exceeded its rated tolerance. Not a malfunction. A decision made under pressure that had downstream consequences no one had tracked. The pilot didn't know, Marcus said. The system doesn't flag coupling stress during evasive maneuvers. It should. It should, the princess agreed. She was very still. Can you show me how to write that flag into the monitoring system? He looked at her for a moment. She was 8 years old, approximately. She had watched a repair through internal sensors, come out alone to assess the mechanic, recognized a flaw in an official engineering report, and spent 3 hours doing root cause analysis with the patients and focus of someone twice her age and half her emotion. Yes, he said. I can show you. The queen received him on the 7th day. He had spent the intervening time working with the princess and with the engineering staff, cautiously at first, then with more ease as the guards and advisors settled into his presence. He was given quarters and meals and access to the technical documentation he requested. No one treated him with ceremony, which he preferred. They treated him like a specialist brought in to do a job, which was accurate. The queen's chambers were simpler than he expected. She was sitting up when he entered, which Solon had told him was a recent development. She was taller than her daughter, with the same gold eyes, but the stillness in her face was different, deeper, older, carrying the weight of authority so long held it had become structural. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. My daughter tells me you teach by showing, not by explaining, she said. Her comment was flawless, the accent of someone who had learned the language from its speakers rather than from recordings. Explanations have limits, Marcus said. Machines don't care what you know. They care what you do. And people? He considered that. People too sometimes. The queen's expression shifted in a way he was beginning to read. The Velsheri equivalent of a smile was subtle, a slight tightening at the outer corners of the eyes, a fractional change in the quality of attention. I am told you refused payment twice, she said. I fixed a coupling. I didn't know what I was fixing. That, she said, is precisely why I would like to offer you something other than payment. She gestured, and Solon stepped forward and placed a document on the small table beside Marcus. He looked at it. The text was in 3 languages, one of which was Station Common. It was an appointment. The title was long and formal in Velsheri and translated in the Common section as something close to technical counselor to the sovereignty, rank of trusted proximity. Marcus looked up. Trusted proximity, he said. It means, the Queen said, that you may go where the work requires, that your judgment on technical matters carries weight, that you answer to no one below the throne. She paused. And that my daughter will have access to someone who teaches by showing. The guards were perfectly still. Solon was watching him with the expression of a man who had written a document he wasn't certain would be accepted. Marcus thought about Doc 7. About 4 minutes of screaming alarm and a ship sitting at an impossible angle. About a choice made not from knowledge of what was at stake, but from the simple recognition that something was trying to stay alive and could use help. He thought about the princess standing at the bench with her gold eyes and her precise questions and her distrust of a report that didn't match what the evidence said. He thought about what it meant to work on something without knowing its full significance. To treat every coupling, every fracture, every failing system with the same patience and care, not because it was important, but because that was simply the correct way to work. There's a flag that still needs to be written into the monitoring system, he said. The Queen looked at him. The lateral stress alert, he said. We identified the root cause of the coupling failure. Your daughter and I started designing the fix. It isn't finished. A silence. That is, the Queen said carefully, not a no. It's a condition, he said. I finished the job I started. The tightening at the outer corners of her eyes again, that fractional, significant change. Yes, she said. You do? He picked up the document. Outside in the corridor, the guards resumed their posts with the quiet efficiency of people who had just witnessed something they would record accurately and interpret privately. The princess was waiting 20 meters down the hall, standing beside the workshop door, hands clasped in front of her, gold eyes tracking him as he approached. She looked at the document in his hand. The flag still needs the threshold calibration, she said. I know, Marcus said. Let's go finish it. She turned and opened the workshop door, and the light inside was broad spectrum and shadowless and exactly right for close detail work, and Marcus Cole walked in and set his toolkit on the bench and got back to the job.